is no doubt that there is existence. Existence is divided into two things: possible existence and necessary existence. Possible existence is existence that otherwise doesn't need to exist. And it's existence that could be arranged in any other way. It's existence which is dependent. For example, I'm wearing a blue blazer. This is a possible existence. It doesn't have to exist. It could be arranged in another way. And it's dependent upon materials that were created, used to create it. Necessary existence, on the other hand, is existence which couldn't be any other way. Existence which could not be any other way, is independent, self-sufficient, and could not be out of existence. Now, the main argument today is this: there cannot be a world with only possible existences. That is the main argument. There cannot be a world with only possible existences. Why? Because if there was only possible existences, I'm going to be using the board a little bit. If there's only possible existences, you would have dependent things depending upon other dependent things. Now, this can be reasoned metaphysically, ontologically, and cosmologically. For example, we have a mathematical set. This is like a series, yes? And you have things within that. Dependent 1, dependent 2, dependent 3. If this series existed by itself, it would require something outside of it, an independent thing, in order for that series to exist. Now, what if we say if this is an infinite series? It's not really a good sign, but let's say if it was an infinite series. We'll get to that in what follows. Now, let's use a cosmological example. We have a tree. There's very beautiful trees here, by the way, in California. Like a cherry tree. I saw a cherry tree. Very beautiful. That tree requires the sun to photosynthesize in order to exist. I think it's fair to say if the tree didn't exist, or if the sun didn't exist, the tree would not exist. It's fair to say this, yes? So long as the sun is required, or so long as the tree exists, the sun will exist. Even if that was for an infinite amount of time. Now, the sun itself is part of its own order. And it's part of its own set. Now, it requires other things in order to exist. At the end of this, what is required, once again, is an independent thing. This independent thing can only be one. Wait a minute. Why is that? Because if there was more than one necessary existence, it wouldn't be a necessary existence, because it could be conceived that it can be arranged in another way. And you can't have two things which are independent, because which one is dependent on which? Therefore, whether you conceptualize this ontologically, cosmologically, on materialism, dualism, idealism, you must conclude that what is required in order for any existence to exist is an independent thing. That is one. That is always in existence. Why? Because if it wasn't in existence, if it could be conceived that this thing is not in existence, it wouldn't be necessary. So it has to be eternal. And it cannot be made up of parts. Why? Because anything which is a compound is generated. Anything that's made up of parts is dependent on those parts. That's point number one. And point number two, if it was a possible existence, if it's made up of parts, you can imagine those parts being arranged in a different way. Therefore, it falls into the category of possible existence. To summarize, you require an independent thing outside of the series of dependent things in order for any existence to exist. This thing must be one. It cannot have parts. It must be immaterial, incorporeal. What else must it be? It must be eternal. Now, this is what the Quran says in its basic definition of God. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Say He is God, one and only. Allahu Samad. The one who's independent, self-sufficient. Everything depends upon him, and he depends upon nothing. لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ. He begets not, nor is he begotten. He is the eternal one, pre-eternal, post-eternal. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. And there is nothing like him. He's immaterial. He's not composed of parts. He's incorporeal. So you see, this is the argument. If this argument is cracked, I have lost the debate. This is my main argument. Everything goes back to this argument, which goes back to the basic definition of God. What must be presented is a formulation, whether it's a cosmological one or an ontological one, which shows us how it's possible that only possible existences can exist without the independent. If that's done, I'm ready to be an atheist today. Now, the Quran says in chapter 52, verse 35, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. Were they created from nothing? Or were they themselves the creators of themselves? Did they create the heavens and the earth? Certainly they have no certainty. Saying that the atheistic position is one of mere speculation. You can never achieve certainty with atheism. Why? Because in this logical disjunction you have four options. Either the universe came from nothing, which is impossible. Ontologically, mathematically, and cosmologically. It's not possible. No one has argued this really. It's a weak argument. I don't think my interlocutor with his experience will go there. He's very prominent and very experienced. He won't go there. And, or, is it eternal? Can it be eternal? Well, let's say it is. Wait a minute, what did you say? Did you concede to that? Yes, well, no problem. Even if it was eternal for the sake of argument, is it dependent or independent? You still have the problem here. But my interlocutor is a naturalist, so he believes in the beginning of the universe. So that's not a problem for us. What other option do we have? Is it self-created? Like my friend Hamza Zulstis says, is it possible for something to exist and not exist at the same time? He gives the example of a mother giving birth to herself. Is that possible? No, it's not possible. Come on. It's not possible. So the other thing is, it was put into existence by something which had the ability to do so. Now, the question is, what are the attributes of that thing which had the ability to put the universe into existence? How do we reason this? By inference, we say, well, if it had the ability to put the universe into existence, it must have power. Because that is required for that kind of thing. It must have creative capacity. It must have knowledge. It must have knowledge. So you see, we start to have a formulation. A question now we have to ask is, why is the universe one way and not another way? It's conceivable, for example, you see you have celestial spheres in the universe. They're rotating in one direction. We can conceive and imagine of the possibility of all of the celestial spheres in the universe going the other way, for example. We can imagine that. So why is the universe one way rather than another way? I will tell you that the only rational explanation for that is that there is an external particularizer of the universe. Say that one more time. That there must be an external particularizer of the universe to choose between different options, possible options. Because then you have no explanation for why the universe is one way rather than another way. You have to have an external sorting agent. You have to have an external what? Sorting agent that decides X rather than Y. Otherwise, the question will be, to the atheist, how can you prove on naturalism, or how can you explain on naturalism, that the universe is one way rather than another way? It's a very straightforward question. Now, here's the thing. If we know that there is an external sorting agent, this implies will of this agent. And if there was more than one will, there would be a chaotic universe. As the Quran says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا فَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَرْشِ عَمَّا يَصِفُونَ. If there was more than one of them, the universe would have been corrupted. The heavens and the earth would have been corrupted. Chapter 21, verse 22. How? Because if there's more than one will, ultimately, which one is steering the ship? There would be chaotic order. The Quran also says, لَعَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. In chapter 23, verse 91. If there was more than one Almighty, they would have outstripped one another, attempted to outstrip one another for power. So in other words, you can't have more than one of those things for those reasons as well. And this brings me to my third point, which is the argument of the physical coherence of the universe, which is a Quranic argument. Because today I'm just going to be sticking with the Quran. The Quran says, الذي خلق سبع سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فرجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم رجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو حسير. That, chapter 67, verse 3. Look at the universe. Look up in the sky. Look at the sky. Look at the coherence of the universe. Do you see any inconsistencies? Look again. The Quran says, wait a minute. Look again. Let me look. Let me see. Is there any inconsistencies? Now, I thought about this verse. And this verse is telling us that there is a uniformity of nature, a consistency of nature, a coherence of nature. The fact that the universe is uniform and coherent is not known by science. It's presupposed by science. Wait a minute, what did you say? Let me say it one more time. If you look, for example, at any introductory guide to the scientific method, like Hugh Gao, he wrote the illustrated guide to the scientific method. He said that the fact that you have rationalizable actors that can see the universe and see its consistency means that there's a presupposition of science. And what is that presupposition? That science is uniform. That the universe is uniform. It's rationalizable. Albert Einstein said in his letters to Solvin, he said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. So I'm not making a fine-tuning argument today because we've heard enough of that. Every atheist and every non-atheist has heard this fine-tuning argument. What's this fine-tuning argument? The argument is, look at the constants of nature. Yes? You have these constants which are in a Goldilocks zone of life-permitting range. If they were any way this way or that way, the universe would not exist, and life would not be possible in the universe. Like Martin Rees wrote just 6 numbers, and he says N, which is capital N, a number, talking about, the natural forces. He says it's a billion, 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 billion. And had any zeros been taken away, yes, then that would have been, the universe would have been completely different. E is another letter that he talks about, the conversion of hydrogen into helium. He says that this conversion is 0.007. Had it been 0.006 or 0.008, we would not exist. This is exactly what he writes. It's not what I'm writing. I'm not a cosmologist. Right? It's what he writes. That's an argument from probability. That's an interesting argument. I think the interesting thing is that many people, theists and non-atheists, accept the fine-tuning of the universe. Stephen Hawking accepted it. Richard Dawkins accepted it. So it's not really an area of controversy. My argument is about the uniformity of nature, the coherence of nature, which is presupposed by the universe, by some scientific method. The question is, therefore, on naturalism, how can you account for the coherence of the universe? You can't say, well, the universe just is, like Bertrand Russell said, because that is a circular argument, frankly. It's a cop-out. I'm asking for an external explanation. We're rational people. We should be able to explain. If naturalism has the ability to give us these answers, then surely we should be entitled to such answers. Now, I've got 5 minutes left, and I've made my arguments. To reiterate, My main argument today is the argument from contingency. And it's not one that Leibniz formulated. It's a different kind of argument from contingency that many Western people are not familiar with. It's from our tradition. And frankly, the main question is this. The question is, how can you explain a world, either ontologically or cosmologically, naturally, that only has possible existences? That's the question.